this Friday night, getting ready for Trump's presidency. Two of Trudeau's top cabinet ministers in Florida to talk with the U.S. president-elect's team. But what's it worth with the Prime Minister's government under threat back home?
I think Canadians have tuned Trudeau out. I don't think he has many days left in Parliament.
Plane crash investigation. The calls to Russia for transparency, as evidence suggests the doomed Azerbaijani flight may have been fired upon. Plus, escalating violence around Nova Scotia's lobster fishery.
Their stuff's been burnt numerous times.
The troubling cases as tensions between commercial and Indigenous fishers heat up. And a computer brain for saving human brains. The AI helping neurosurgeons determine who needs treatment stat.
Global National, reporting tonight, and Gaviola.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. It was a short-lived winter break for two of Justin Trudeau's top cabinet ministers. Dominic, LeBlanc and Mélanie Joly have traveled south to push Canada's new border plan to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's transition team. The trip marks the second time Canadian government officials have made the journey since Trump's victory in November, as a 25% tariff threat looms ahead of his inauguration next month. Questions over how long this Liberal government will remain in power are growing louder, though, as the opposition moves forward on plans to bring them down. Mackenzie Gray has tonight's top story. Mac.
Well, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc is back in South Florida again and trying to work those contacts he made at the Trudeau-Trump dinner, this time bringing along the Foreign Affairs Minister to try and sell their $1.3 billion border and immigration plan, a pitch that started last week.
Mélanie and I had a preliminary conversation with the incoming border czar, Tom Homan. It was, we think, encouraging.
LeBlanc meeting again with incoming Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and incoming Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who were both at the Trump-Trudeau dinner. LeBlanc's office saying the secretaries would inform Trump of the new border plan and that the impact the tariffs would have on both countries was also discussed, something LeBlanc has routinely pushed.
The Foreign Affairs Minister, who wanted to be with us today, but Mélanie has sort of lost her voice.
But Joly has done less of. Widely viewed as a potential leadership candidate to replace Trudeau, Joly hasn't spoken with the media or even been seen attending cabinet meetings since Chrystia Freeland's shock resignation, a job she could soon be vying for with the Prime Minister, who's on vacation in BC, still not publicly addressing his future.
He thinks he can lead a campaign that wins back the hearts and minds of Liberals and Canadians. I differ with him.
Well, Trudeau's former parliamentary secretary, Adam Vaughan, believes the Prime Minister would like to hang on. Him doing so could lead to a Liberal electoral disaster.
They want to sort of have a fighting chance to win the next election, let alone finish second. I think they need to change in direction and a reset.
And that election could be coming sooner than anticipated. The Conservatives are planning to force a non-confidence vote at the committee level in the early new year, which, if passed by all opposition parties, would trigger a vote in the House of Commons that could potentially bring down the government at the end of January.
We believe it's at the earliest opportunity. We need to let Canadians decide what they want for their future by having a carbon tax election.
Lack of clarity around Trudeau's leadership and the threat of an imminent election that polls show the Conservatives would win handily puts both Joly and LeBlanc in a difficult position, and with an incoming president that seems more interested in controlling than negotiating.
Thanks, Mac. That is Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Ipsos polling exclusively for Global News shows the majority of Canadians now want an early election. With a trip to the federal ballot box happening in 2025, here's more on what issues and priorities are seen as most urgent.
Even though inflation has subsided, the scars of inflation are still there.
So-called kitchen table economics takes center stage. According to Ipsos polling exclusively for Global News, the top issue facing the country is inflation and the cost of living. Healthcare in second place with 17%, while housing is in third, followed by immigration, tied with the economy and jobs.
People couldn't afford their groceries last year. What leads us to believe that they are better able to afford them this year? The answer is they cannot. We just simply can't underestimate the degree to which these issues are keeping Canadians up at night.
Equally telling, what didn't top the list this year? Healthcare, which is primarily funded and administered by the provinces and territories.
Well, the other thing that's remarkable about this poll is healthcare being in second place. Why is that remarkable? Because it's almost always in first place.
Also notable, immigration's high ranking.
Starting to lose the national consensus that we have on immigration in Canada, which, for the last number of decades has not been questioned.
With a federal election in the cards for 2025, politicians would do well to listen to what topics are striking a chord with voters and what isn't. Like climate change, which was a key issue for the Liberals and Canadians in 2019.
It's being deprioritized for Canadians. If you're struggling to put food on the table, if you're struggling to put a roof over your head and the head of your children, climate change is just simply going to fall down the list.
Indian law enforcement agencies say they are investigating widespread trafficking of international students through Canadian colleges into the U.S. Indian officials say they have incriminating evidence of human trafficking involving dozens of Canadian colleges and two so-called entities in Mumbai. They say an investigation started after a man and his wife and their two children were found frozen to death in January 2022 near Emerson, Manitoba, near the U.S. border.
Those incidents have always highlighted the extent of how rampant the human trafficking across the Canadian-US borders is. And I guess these incidents then bring those to a further highlight, or rather put them on a spotlight. And yes, these need more investigations. They need more oversight to identify where exactly things are going wrong.
Last month, two men were found guilty in connection with the deaths of the Indian migrant family and are currently awaiting sentencing. The federal government now says it is deeply concerned by recent reports that Russian forces may have fired a missile and caused that deadly Christmas Day crash landing of an Azerbaijani passenger plane in Kazakhstan. There is no clear-cut evidence yet that was the case, but new findings from the crash that killed 38 people are doing little to quell those theories. Reggie Cecchini has the latest on that investigation.
Salvaged from the twisted remains of this Azerbaijani jetliner, possible clues to what went wrong in the final moments, with investigators now in possession of both black boxes. There were people who panicked, this survivor says. We tried to calm them down, telling them to not panic. The pockmarked exterior of the plane is a key focus. It was over Russian airspace when it ran into problems, and the airline says, quote, external interference is to blame. We don't consider ourselves free to make any assessment, Russia's foreign minister said. But while Moscow might be silent, there are deep concerns being voiced from afar.
It seemed likely that it was potentially caused by an air defense system, just because the shrapnel pattern was consistent with being shot down by a surface-to-air missile.
These are early indications. There is an active investigation going on. I don't want to get ahead of where we are right now.
The plane had an American-made engine, so the U.S. is offering help. And while not jumping to conclusions, the White House isn't ruling out Russian air defense systems being involved. The area had been experiencing Ukrainian drone attacks, and the airline's GPS could have been jammed.
If Russia tries to deny this or cover this up, it could lead to a rift in Russian relations with Azerbaijan. That could also lead to further degradation of relations between Russia and other countries along its border.
Many nations already avoid much of Russia's airspace, but others don't. And in this case, the plane was near a war zone.
We had a case just recently in which a U.S. anti-aircraft fire hit a U.S. aircraft in the area around Yemen. So these kinds of things do happen.
An investigation will take months to complete to determine whether this was a case of mistaken identity or worse, leaving families with few answers for now. Reggie Cecchini, Global News, Washington.
Russia is also drawing attention over the suspected sabotage of undersea cables in northern Europe. Finland's Coast Guard has seized a ship it believes had severed electricity and internet cables on Christmas Day. A vessel the European Union says is part of Russia's shadow fleet. As Redmond Shannon reports, it is just the latest in a series of similar incidents in the past several months.
The Eagle S, prime suspect in the latest severed cable in the Baltic Sea. Finland's Coast Guard has seized the Cook Islands registered oil tanker, accusing the crew of dragging the ship's anchor through an electric cable and 4 internet cables linking Finland and Estonia. The vessel's port-side anchor notably missing. The cutting of the cables between the NATO members happened a month after 2 similar incidents, when data cables between Sweden and Lithuania and between Finland and Germany were severed.
It can't be by accident.
It's too soon to draw conclusions yet why this happened. We know who did it.
The European Union says the suspected culprit vessel is part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers. This month, Western allies agreed on new sanctions targeting them. The Kremlin didn't comment on this incident, but didn't deny involvement. In February, Estonia is set to finally disconnect from Russia's power grid.
This could be a signal that Russia is sending that we cannot engage in direct military action, but we might be able to do damage through this kind of stealth action and yet have possible deniability.
NATO chief Mark Rutte says the alliance will enhance its presence in the Baltic. Estonia has deployed a Navy vessel to protect another power cable to Finland. As its government looks to reassure citizens, the lights will stay on.
Cables under the sea are very difficult to police because there are thousands of them, and they go on for miles and miles and miles, and they're largely unprotected.
In 2022, 2 Baltic Sea gas pipelines between Russia and Germany were sabotaged. Russia, Ukraine and the US all deny accusations of involvement. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A hospital in northern Gaza was raided by Israeli forces Friday. Gaza's health ministry says dozens of patients and hundreds of others were forced from the Kamal Adwan hospital, leaving part of the hospital on fire. It is one of the last hospitals operating in the northernmost part of Gaza. Palestinian health officials said contact with staff inside the hospital, which had faced weeks of Israeli attacks, has been lost. South Korea has impeached acting leader President Han Duck-soo less than 2 weeks after lawmakers impeached the country's former president. Chaos erupted in parliament as ruling party lawmakers walked towards the podium ahead of the impeachment vote. Han took over after President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached by the assembly over briefly imposing martial law earlier this month. South Korea's finance minister is now set to become acting president. Germany's president dissolved the country's lower house of parliament today, paving the way for a snap election in February. The move follows the collapse of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's 3-way coalition earlier this month. Scholz will remain as chancellor until the election and is set to run again in 8 weeks' time. However, polls show center-right opposition leader Friedrich Merz is likely to lead his Christian Union party to victory. Fed up and fearful. Coming up, the Nova Scotia residents at their wits' end from the so-called lobster wars after a year marked by violence and intimidation. Fishing is underway in Canada's largest lobster fishery after a long and uncertain period for those relying on the industry in southwest Nova Scotia. A series of violent incidents tied to the lucrative harvest has left people on edge. Heidi Petracek looks at the troubling escalation as residents say they are fed up with living in fear.
These bullet holes in a lobster buyer's home in southwestern Nova Scotia are testament to a frightening year. No one was hurt here, but it's the latest act of violence in what used to be a quiet rural fishing area.
Doors are locked, cars are locked, everything, when you used to be able to walk into your next door neighbor's house at any time, and it's not like that anymore for sure.
This year, the RCMP has investigated more than a dozen cases, including assault, intimidation, and arson in communities from St. Bernard to Meteghan.
We've had 19 incidents where we ended up laying some charges, and those charges are 52 charges in all.
One guy I know's had their stuff has been burnt numerous times. They rebuild and they burn again. They rebuild and they burn again.
Tensions first ramped up in the area in 2020 after members of Sebeganegedy First Nation began harvesting lobster outside the commercial season. Those treaty rights are now being debated in court as a commercial fishermen's group alleges catches are being illegally sold while Ottawa stands by.
Anything short of arresting the perpetrators, seizing the vessels that are involved in the out-of-season fishing will only be seen as more lies.
Earlier this year, some fisheries enforcement officers refused to work because of threats. The federal minister has acknowledged lobster sold under the table is empowering criminals. The RCMP says the violence is linked to a small but organized group seeking profits from poaching.
There's only so many fishermen, and if they want to increase their product activity or level, then they will entice and try to intimidate and go about that.
Despite the charges laid so far, residents remain scared and frustrated.
I fear that some of the good people around here are giving up on the RCMP and they're going to take matters in their own hands.
So we watch out for each other and hope for the best, I guess.
A safe and peaceful new year is what they want most. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Donald Trump's pledge to pardon hundreds of rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol building on January 6, 2021, could unleash legal shockwaves. That is just ahead. The new year will bring a new president in the United States, one who's making big promises about undoing the past. Donald Trump has said he will pardon the hundreds of people who stormed the U.S. Capitol building on January 6, 2021, to try and overturn the election he says he lost. Jackson Proskow looks at the impact these unprecedented pardons could have on the U.S. legal system.
They stormed the Capitol building in Donald Trump's name, assaulting police officers and threatening to kill the vice president. 2 pipe bombs and countless weapons were recovered, all part of a failed attempt to overturn the will of voters.
It was a day of love.
Since that day, more than 1,500 people have been charged, more than 1,200 have been convicted or pleaded guilty. Some are in prison on serious charges of felony assault and seditious conspiracy.
Will that be a blanket pardon? Does that include
Well, you'll find
everyone?
out, but it's going to go quickly.
Trump has promised to use the power of the pardon to potentially free all of the January 6th rioters as soon as his first day in office, effectively rewriting the history of what happened nearly 4 years ago.
His ability to pardon those others who put in motion the process to disrupt the joint session and prevent the transfer of power, again, would be a huge defeat for the rule of law and move us a step farther from accountability.
It's a particularly glaring use of power because Trump would be pardoning people who are in fact his alleged co-conspirators in a plot to overturn the election. Legal experts warn the promise alone sets a frightening precedent about a president's willingness to flaunt the law.
I think it sends a message that in the future, if the president wants anything, he will preemptively pardon anyone carrying out his wishes because he cares more about people following his wishes than he does whatever legal rules they might be breaking.
Yet Trump isn't stopping there, with Republicans openly signaling their intent to go after those who investigated the January 6th attack, suggesting former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney should herself be investigated and prosecuted for her work on the January 6th committee. Trump has said that other members of the committee should go to jail.
There's nothing we did as a January 6th select committee that violates the law.
Promising vengeance is one thing, whether Trump actually acts is another. It seems all but certain he will use the first hours of his presidency to signal how far he's willing to go, potentially testing the American system in ways it has never been tested before. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Tapping AI for medical triage, how artificial intelligence can help doctors quickly determine what's a brain emergency and what isn't. That is next. We often hear about the concerns surrounding artificial intelligence, but in Toronto, a team of doctors has come up with a way to harness the potential of the technology. As Catherine Ward shows us, they're using AI to read brain scans to help determine which cases are truly an emergency.
This moment encapsulates a challenge doctors face on a weekly basis.
Neurosurgeons in the province of Ontario get over 20,000 urgent calls per year from outside hospitals that don't have neurosurgical support.
Dr. Chris Witu is reading a brain scan of a patient in another city. A nurse holds the phone to his ear in order to maintain sterility. The surgical team stands by during the emergency consult, waiting to get back to the patient on the table.
The calls were quite extensive. They're quite overwhelming.
I think a lot of emergency physicians are trained in being able to recognize when there is a bleed in someone's brain, right? But the challenge is does that brain bleed need emergent neurosurgical care?
And many of the times referrals are actually things that maybe could have waited, but seem to be urgent at the time. And so just as an example, about 80% of the referrals probably could have waited.
The team at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto built an AI model to help make those preliminary decisions, dubbed Assist TBI. Radiologist Dr. Errol Kolek explains.
So this tool is trained with thousands of head CT scans. We want this to run in the background, automatically process CT scans, and if a patient is triaged as someone who needs urgent neurosurgical intervention, we want this to basically be an automated alert for the physicians.
The model isn't meant to replace doctors. Instead, it's designed to catch brain bleeds that could go undetected. The team says the results speak for themselves.
This tool was compared to board-certified neurosurgeons and actually performed as well and maybe even slightly better than the neurosurgeons in identifying neurosurgical bleeds.
Mohammed Mandani says it has the potential to save lives.
1 in 10 to 1 in 20 bleeds are routinely missed. 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 bleeds. That shouldn't happen. We need these algorithms in community hospitals, in smaller centers that don't have the specialist resources that we do.
The team believes the technology could be expanded to screen for bleeds in other organs too. But for now, the next step is for the model to be tested at another hospital before seeking Health Canada approval for a wider rollout. Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
That is fascinating. And that is Global National for this Friday, the 27th of December. I'm Anne Gaviola, in for Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is snowy Saskatoon. We love to see your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you here again tomorrow.